super excited for this talk today. My talk is titled Composability, the New Architect in Town. Now, some of you might have heard about composable architecture or composability, and for some of you, this might be a new term. Well, don't worry about it. I'm going to help you understand what it really means. Before I jump into it, I would like to thank Brian and the whole CFE team for organizing this conference and giving me this opportunity to come and talk and share my knowledge with you all. And also a huge shout out to the AV team. I had a call with them earlier as well, and they have been amazing. And this gives us more confidence as a speaker to come on the stage and share our knowledge with you all. So thank you, Brian, and then the whole team. All right. Jumping into the talk, I want to do a quick introduction about myself. As you all now know, my name is Harshil Agrawal, and I work as a developer advocate at Contentful. For the folks who don't know what Contentful is, I am gonna do a small introduction. So Contentful is a composable content platform with an API-first architecture, which means that using Contentful, you can manage your content as well as orchestrate content from other platforms and distribute that content or publish that content on any digital channel of your choice. But that's about Contentful. A bit more about me. I like to think about myself as an experimentalist because I try out different technologies. Some things you might have heard, some things you might have not heard, and like to share that with the community. Recently, I have been working and playing around with the Web HID API. If you don't know that API, it's basically an API that allows you to connect any of your HID devices to your web applications. If you want to learn more about it, you can go on my website and check out a couple of talks that I have given around Web HID. And I am also learning digital illustrations. This has been happening for 6 months now. I don't know if I have made any progress in that, but I've been enjoying the whole process and it's fun. And everything that you see on this particular slide is basically all the art that I created myself. All right, enough about me. Let's jump into the talk. So the agenda for this talk looks something like this. We're gonna all build a website together, which is gonna be a lot of fun. We're gonna learn a lot of new things. We're gonna talk about things like monolithic architecture and the limitations it has. We're gonna look into microservices and talk about how it overcomes the limitations that monolithic provides. And then we're gonna later on jump into composable architecture, which is the main theme of this talk. All right, so let's move forward. We know that we all want to build a website. So the first thing we do is we do a bit of research. We do a look at the requirements that we want a website to have. So I did a bit of research and I looked into the things that I want to have in my website. The first thing I wanted for my users to do is have the ability to go and shop things that are available on the website. So shopping was one of the features that I wanted to have on my website. But I didn't want it to stop there. I wanted my users to also go and learn new skills on the website while they are shopping, because why not, right? So learning became another product or another part of my website. The next is, well, the users are going to shop. They're going to learn new things. I also want them to have some kind of entertainment in there. So I decided, hey, why not plug in a system where people can just go watch some stuff, maybe look at some cat gifs and have some fun. And while I was listing out all these features, I thought, hey, it would be great to bring people together and have a socializing aspect to this whole website. Now let's take a pause over here and think about our usage of internet every day. We are using the internet for either of these four things, right? We are either looking for something to buy, or we are researching on something that we want to buy. We are always learning new things. We are using social media platforms to connect with our friends, with the community, with our family, and we all use it for some kind of entertainment as well. If you think about it, all this is also connected with one thing, and that is content. Everything that we see on the internet is basically built of content. And over the past couple of years, the amount of content that has been generated is massive. It's not just the generation of the content that has increased, but even the consumption of content has increased. Now, I want to build a website. I want to build my own business. So I need to make sure that I know what my competition looks like. And this is what it looks like. There are roughly 2 billion websites online. As someone who wants to start their own business, this is my reaction like, what? How am I going to be able to grab the attention of my audience, make them stay on my website, make them use my website? But I am someone who is very ambitious and who likes to take up challenges. So I said, hey, you know what? Let there be 2 billion websites out there. I'm going to build the best website that my users, which are dogs, are going to enjoy using. So I took up this challenge and I started working on this. But there was one thing that I thought when I first started to write the code. I was like, what happens if all the dogs on this planet use the website at the same time? Will my website scale? Will my website be reliable for all my users to access it? And this is where I started to have more conversations with my team and started to discuss potential solutions. And one thing we also learned during this journey was content is the king. Content will help us get more traction. So we started focusing on the marketing part while we were still building our product. So with the first step we took was, hey, let's just have a static website where all the content is also static. So it becomes easy for everyone to get started. But that was a terrible approach because it introduced a lot of problems. Because it was now a static website with, or let me rephrase this, because now the content was static, it was difficult to update this content. Everything sit within the code itself. So if my marketing team wanted to update a content or add a new content, they could not directly do that because they were semi-technical or did not have the knowledge of the code base. We also looked into the problem of no history for the content that we have. Now, again, we do have history for the code, but not exactly for the content, which again was an issue for our marketing team because we might launch a marketing campaign on the wrong time and we wanted to roll that back. And this was not really possible with the static content approach that we took. And lastly, it was really time consuming because every time we wanted to have a new content out there, we would have to bug the engineering team, open up a Jira ticket for them. They would add it in their cycle and then publish that whenever they had time. And while they were doing that, we were also losing time on building out the core features. So static content didn't really work well for us. So we started looking for another solution and we came up across CMS. CMS basically stands for Content Management System, and they basically allow your teams to work in silos. So your marketing team would now be able to work on the content that they want without heavily depending on the engineering team, which was really good. But the legacy CMS systems introduce new challenges for us. They introduce client-side rendering. Now, dogs, if I have to tell you this, they don't like to wait for websites to load. They want everything just instantly on their browser. So client-side rendering wasn't a friend over here. This gave slow results to our users and was no fun. And it also gave introduction to monolithic architecture. Now, I'm going to not talk about monolithic architecture on this particular slide. I'm going to cover that later on. But just keep in mind, when using a legacy CMS system, you don't really get a lot of flexibility. All right. Moving forward, we thought, all right, CMS was a good approach, was a good idea, but it didn't really solve a problem. It introduced a couple of new problems. That's where the headless CMS helped us out. Now, headless CMS takes an API first approach, which means that your content layer is separate from your delivery layer. All the content that your marketing team manages is on a platform which can be connected to your front end via an API, which means that now you can use one single platform and publish this content to any channel that you want. We were looking into this new tech things that the dogs were really into, which is like AR, VR, and dogs also like to use mobile applications a lot. So we are like, okay, headless CMS can be a good approach for us because we can now have one platform where we can distribute this content, or using this platform, we can distribute content on the AR, VR apps that we have on our mobile applications and on the website as well. And engineers loved this as well because it was front-end framework agnostic. So they could use the latest JavaScript framework that was released yesterday, and they could quickly build up the website from scratch. So this was fun for them as well. But while we were building this, while we were creating our product, while we were creating our website, we learned a few things. We learned that we are not just using one platform. We are not just using a CMS. For our digital assets, we were using a digital asset management system. So this would handle our audio files, our videos, our images, our PDF files. Think of any digital asset that you might have. We also have a shopping feature on our website. So we wanted to use something that is called a product information management system, which allows us to basically manage the products that we have. Being ambitious that we are, we thought, hey, why not also use an ECM? It will give us a full-fledged flexibility, a full-fledged set of features to make it a proper e-commerce website. So we thought like, hey, let's use an ECM as well. So we were using all these three platforms on top of a content management system. Now, if you think about it, it really is not an ideal scenario because now your teams are working in silos. The team that is managing your product information is not communicating a lot with the team that is managing your blog content or the marketing content, right? So you often might have miscommunication or no communication at all, which would lead to inconsistent user experience. Now the dogs would see some information on the product page, while a completely different information on the marketing website, which was really not a good experience for them. And lastly, this also introduced slow development speed for our engineers because we had now 4 different platforms to integrate to our website. We had 4 different APIs to work with, 4 different API structures to look at. So really not an ideal scenario for us. So we all got together, sat down in a room, and started thinking about potential solutions to overcome this. We had to use all these different platforms to have a proper streamlined workflow, but it also came up with all these limitations. So we are not exactly sure what should we do and how do we approach this. This is when we learned about monolithic architecture. Now I'm going to explain you what monolithic architecture is with an analogy. So this image represents a jigsaw puzzle. And for the folks who don't know what a jigsaw puzzle is, it's basically a set of pieces, as you can see on the slides over here, which are arranged in a way that would complete an image and make that puzzle look complete and look more pretty. But there is a catch with jigsaw puzzles. If one single piece is missing, it looks incomplete, it looks broken. And you cannot swap pieces with each other, or you cannot introduce new pieces over here, because then it breaks your whole puzzle, it breaks your whole image. And that is not a good thing. So these were also like the limitations that the monolithic architecture came with. The first thing was like it introduced slow development speed, because with each of these pieces, they were needed to be placed in a particular order. And if one piece wasn't there, the team would have to wait for that piece to complete or that component to be developed and then start working on the other part of that particular website. So this introduced slow development speed. Then there was the issue of scalability as well. These pieces were so dependent on each other that they would scale up all together or they would scale down all together. These pieces would not scale up or down individually. This also kind of had a resulted into the problem of reliability. Because if one piece was missing, basically a puzzle was incomplete, a puzzle was broken. So if one component of a website was down, a whole website would be down. And introducing new components or new pages in here was not feasible. It would take a lot of work and wasn't really a good choice for us. So we looked for another solution, and we knew like these were the initial limitations that we're gonna hit into. So we were like, all right, this is not gonna work. We need to come up with a better solution that's gonna help us overcome this. And that's where we looked into microservices. Now we looked into monolithic architecture as a jigsaw puzzle. The way I like to think about microservices is like building blocks. You can arrange these blocks however you want, whatever shape you want, and whatever arrangement you want to have. They're still going to look good, they're still going to work, and they're not going to break. And this is what basically microservices is. They are basically building blocks that are independent of each other, and they overcome all the limitations that the monolithic architecture provides. For example, slow development speed. Now that we have building blocks which are independent of each other, our teams could work on each individual building blocks, and they did not have to rely on one building block to start working on the another building block. It was scalable enough, again, because these building blocks are independent of each other. They can scale up and down individually. They were reliable, again, because if one thing went down, the other building blocks are still going to work and they're still going to be there. And they were flexible because I can add more blocks to it, or I can swap out blocks and things are still going to work. But this was still not ideal, because let's go back to our previous example of the product information page and the marketing page for the same product. We had some information of the product on a product information page, but that information wasn't consistent with our marketing page, which means that we had content on two different platforms for the same thing, which was not consistent, which was different. And this is where we started to understand the limitations of microservices. Even though microservices came up and solved all the issues, or almost all the issues that we had with monolithic architecture, it introduced a couple of new interesting issues for us. And that's where we were like, all right, okay, let's take a quick pause over here. Let's try to understand what we really need. And that's where we heard about composability. Now, in composability, we like to think about these building blocks as components. And these components have certain characteristics. The first is that these components are modular, which means that you can break these components down into smaller components and reuse these components across your website or across your application. And the other thing is that these components are interoperable, which means that these components can talk to each other whenever needed, which overcome the problem that we had earlier. So if we had information on one platform that we wanted to reuse on another platform, with the composable architecture, we could do that as well. So now that we have a CMS, we have a DAM, we have a PIM, and we have an ECM. Remember, we still have these four systems. We know we want to take a composable approach, but we are not exactly sure how to do that, because composable architecture does solve the problem of reusability, but our developers still need to work with four different APIs, with four different API structures together. Not ideal. And we also needed to make sure that we have reusability in place, but how do we do that? That's where Contentful comes into the picture. Contentful, as I mentioned earlier, is a composable content platform, which means that now you can have the flexibility of a composable architecture in your headless content management system. So if you have your information distributed to other platforms, you can bring in to Contentful, stitch it to whatever you want, and then making just one API call, publish it to any digital channel of your choice. So now if I have my product information in a PIM system, I can fetch that information into Contentful, use it in wherever I want, and then publish that out to my digital channels. So here is what composability brings to the picture. It brings this feature called orchestration, which again means bringing content or bringing information from other platform to a single platform. Because now we have this flexibility, it allows us to reuse this content or reuse this information wherever we want. Now, if you are a front-end developer like me, you would be able to relate how components work in front-end frameworks that we have, right? We create these components to reuse them across our application. And that's what we do with this composable architecture. We create components that we can reuse across our applications or across our architecture over here. So this is a small video of how you can achieve composability in Contentful. So over here, I have created a shopping website using Shopify and Contentful. I added integration over here. As you can see, I've already configured my Shopify app. I love Pokemons, so I've added a Pokemon over here and I hit on publish. Now this is available out there. So if I go open up the GraphQL playground and make a query, I can get the information that is already in Contentful. So let's just first get the title that we already have in Contentful. If we hit this, we get the title. Things look good. I can get the product as well. But over here, it just gives me the product ID. What if I want more information? That's where orchestration comes into the picture. And now I can query the product data that I have in the Shopify platform. So the title and description. And now over here, I have the title and the description, which means that now my content creators, my marketers, they don't have to have the same information everywhere. They can have this information at one single place, and we can reuse this information anywhere needed in our website. So this is what basically the the application layer looks like for our website now. So we have a data layer where we have a product catalog, a CRM, and all the other data that we need. Then there is a platform layer, which contains all the platforms that we are using for our application, for example, search, personalization, content, etc. And because in our experience, we learned that content is where we want to orchestrate all this information. It is where we want to reuse this information that we already have on the data layer as well as on the platform layer. We selected content as our orchestration platform, and we now bring all this content to Contentful and and use the API that Contentful provides and the SDKs that Contentful provides to publish all this content on the channels that we have. So let's take a look at the advantages of composable architecture. Because composable architecture is an extension of microservices, it is scalable. Each component is modular enough. They still can talk to each other, but they are still independent of each other. So if you want to scale up one component, it can easily scale without hindering any of the other components. It's flexible as well if you want to introduce a new platform to your application, or if you want to swap out your platform, maybe you want to swap out your PIM because you found out there is a new fancy looking PIM, which is less expensive and gives you more features. You can do that as well, because again, all you now need to do is connect that PIM system to Contentful, and you have that same structure in Contentful, so you don't really have to make a lot of changes in your front end as well. The next is now we have the capability of reusing the information that we have spread across different platforms. This can be, again, digital assets, your product information, or any other information that you have. Because we are now reusing the content that we have on one platform, we are providing our users with consistent experience throughout our application. So now our users can see the same information that we have on our product page as the same on the blogging or the marketing page that we have for the product. And our developers are happy as well, because components, they can work individually. They can bring the components together to talk to each other, but they are not really dependent on any other component, which makes our developers happy as well. So let's do a quick recap and see what we covered in this talk. So we looked that monolithic architecture is like a jigsaw puzzle, and it makes it difficult to introduce new platforms, new services, or new tech stack. Whereas microservices is more like a building blocks, and it is easy to introduce new platforms with microservices architecture. And composable architecture is an extension to microservices, which brings features like reusability and orchestration to your architecture. Now that we are using composable architecture, our end users, again, which are dogs, are super happy with this, and they love coming to the website, shop for their favorite things, go and have entertainments. For them, the entertainment is watching cat gifs, and yeah, learn new things and just have fun. All right, thank you all, and I hope you learned something new today, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks, Harshil. That was great. It's funny. I was watching that and I'm like, okay. I mean, I've been a big user of Netlify for a number of times, and they've moved also to like this terminology of composable architectures, and they've largely dropped Jamstack. And so in my mind, I'd kind of thought, oh, okay, it's one and the same. It's just a new, more enterprisey version of talking about Jamstack. But like listening to your presentation, I'm like, okay, maybe I had that wrong, because Jamstack tended to be more about how you built the site, about the front end.
Yeah.
Like it was the tooling around the front end of the site and how you built it, how you deployed it, etc. And it seems like composable architectures is more about the back end, how you bring all the different APIs you're connecting together into a single consolidated API. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. It changes the way I frame it for sure. Okay, so we did have one question from the audience, but again, folks, I'd love to hear your questions. And the question was from David. He asks specifically about the digital asset management. Can the DAM be customized based on articles, and overall, can it be organized by categories? I don't know how much you know about using them, but I don't know. I'm assuming he's asking, can you organize it so that the content, the images or video in the DAM are connected to like the articles in the CMS, so like that which article, which images go to which articles, I think is what he's asking.
Okay. I think that would really depend on how your team structures things, right? Because it really varies from organization to organization and from team to team. And also it depends on what kind of DAM you are using, because there might be a DAM that would have like an inbuilt feature where maybe you can add tags in there, right? To identify what kind of things or when you should use that particular asset. So maybe your DAM already gives you that flexibility. If not, you might have to have folder structure in that DAM. I have used 2 or 3 DAMs, and most of them have a folder structure. So maybe that would be an approach that you would want to take. Again, like with the context that I have, this is what I can think of right now.
Okay, that makes sense. So Richard asks what the preview capabilities of Contentful are. Do you have live preview?
We do have live preview. We released live preview a while back. I think 6 months back. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But we do have live preview, and we are releasing new features for the live preview as well. Some of them are like already available for EAP, but you can go on add the SDK in your website, and you can just get started with live preview on Contentful. We have documentation, we have video tutorials, we have blog posts around that as well.
Excellent. And I'm curious, so you talked about you can integrate all these different endpoints. So is it kind of open-ended? I can integrate whatever endpoints I might want, or is it something like I have to have a particular Contentful integration with?
So right now, the wonderful team that is working on the orchestration, they are working on making the SDK more flexible. So while they were building this, they were also building or improving the SDK that we have for something called App Framework, where folks can like easily create this or bring this orchestration feature to whatever services they use. So if
Okay.
you are using a service that we don't really have an app for, you can create your own app which can give you this orchestration flexibility as well.
Okay. So that's coming though. You said that's not out,
Yeah,
or it
that's
is
that's
out
coming.
already?
That's coming.
It's coming. So in theory, then at that point, I'd be able to say, because I worked for a company that did some of this stuff a few years back, and that the idea was, well, you might have like an internal API, like that's a REST
Yeah.
API that you want to connect also like to, whereas you have your CMS and you have your DAM and you might have your, e-commerce, provider and then internal APIs. So like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of different pieces there. Okay, excellent. So what's the difference between, this is from Ben, what's the difference between using Contentful and a data unification layer like Netlify Connect?
I haven't used Netlify Connect, so I cannot say a lot about that. So yeah, I don't want to give you a wrong answer, so I just don't have enough knowledge to answer this question.
Yeah, I haven't used it either, but I think, so I'm assuming that in the assumption is that Contentful is the CMS provider in this case. I don't think Netlify has a built-in CMS. You'd have to actually, one of the connections would be a CMS. So I know that's a difference. Beyond that, I don't know myself either. So one of the things I was also thinking about is, especially because that company I worked for a few years back was all GraphQL. One of the struggles I had was like teams hadn't adopted GraphQL, but it seems like the entire concept of composable architectures is built upon GraphQL. Am I right? I mean, that seems like you can't really do this without GraphQL. I'm assuming you have to connect to Contentful's GraphQL API rather than their REST API in order to take advantage of this.
Yeah, for now, it's only supported in Contentful. If I talk about, it's only supported in the GraphQL API, but the team is working on bringing this flexibility to the REST API. But if you think about GraphQL APIs, like it's basically graphs, and that's what we are doing. We're connecting different graphs together to bring this flexibility. So GraphQL made more sense to like release first, and based on the feedback that we get from the users, we're gonna have hopefully bring this to the SDK as well, so that people can just use the native SDKs that we have and have orchestration as there as well.
Oh, okay. So for the moment, it's not in the SDKs. You query the GraphQL API directly.
It's the GraphQL API right now.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I do think like this is exactly what GraphQL does best. It's like, there are times where it can be difficult to use, but I think specifically when you have an API that is not necessarily static, like in this case, like I don't necessarily know like the structure of everything I'm connecting to outright to like be able to say, here's the REST endpoint that gives you all of these things, right? So I think it's perfectly suited for this. So one last question here. Katarina asks, what would you say are the disadvantages of composable architecture?
That's a good question. For me, I don't really think there is a disadvantage. I feel like the way I like to think is, if you are growing, if you're a small team, thinking about composable architecture early on might not be that useful, because then you would have to deal with a lot of different things. And as your company grows, you might have to keep on changing the platforms that you are using based on your use cases. So that's the one thing that I think, again, like changing the platforms is not really a big problem, but you might have to like move content across, and that's not a really good experience for anyone in any team. So that's the only thing that I kind of talk to people when I talk about the composable approach. While we talk about composable approach and we want more people to adapt it, I would say like look at the scale of the organization and see if it really makes sense for your organization at this point to adapt that. So that's the only thing that I kind of think about as a disadvantage of composable architecture, is that people just want to jump in without really thinking about if it's exactly what they need at this point of time.
Right. That makes sense. I think, and this is not a dig at any particular provider, but it's just something to think about, I think, is that you also, I would, from my perspective, you have a little bit of lock-in from like
Yeah.
a provider standpoint, because like you're going to have to re-architect. So, you have to put some thought into like, what's best suits your application up front, because you kind of, it's going to be harder to move off of whatever
Yeah.
platform you chose, right?